last thing I want to talk about before we start animating this barrel, and that is the way our deformation looks. So if I start bending my barrel, I get a very interesting deformation here. Now if I squash it, you'll notice that it's squashing straight up and down. I think that the important thing to recognize here is how we created this deformer. We added the bend to it, and then we added the squash to it. And Maya remembers the order in which you added them. And so with the mesh selected, I can still select it over here in the outliner if it's locked, or I can unlock it here in my layer and right click and select it this way. With the mesh selected, I'm going to go down here to inputs and all inputs. And what you'll see is the bend and then the squash. And so this works from the bottom up, right? And so this tells you the order in which these two deformations are applied to this object. And so I can change this input order. If I middle click on linear bend and drag it to the top, or well, let's do it the other way around. Let's choose squash and drag it below. Then those two deformers are still applying to it, but you'll notice that the result is a different result. And so sometimes I like to try those out and see which result I like better. And in this case, I think I like having this result better because my stretch allows me to stretch along the bend angle. And so I think I'm going to use this option now to do my animation. Now that that's working, let's go ahead and start doing some animation. Again, I'll zero this out, and I'm going to go ahead and lock my barrel mesh so I don't accidentally select it. And I'm just going to animate this barrel sort of waving from side to side. So I'm going to hit, I'm going to go ahead and start posing. I'm going to bend my barrel a little bit like this. Maybe stretch it out a little bit. Right? And so I'll start there, and I'll hit S. And then I'm just going to go, let's say, 20 frames, and maybe not that far. Let's do it 15 frames into the future. And I'm just going to bend it in the other direction. And I may go ahead and hit S, and I'll use the greater than, less than keys to look at that. And you'll see that from here I was going from -17 to here to +21. So maybe what I'll do in this first one is I'll go ahead and move that on down to -21. So it's a little bit more symmetrical. And go ahead and hit S again. Now I'm using auto key, so it's automatically setting those keys. And so now I'm getting this wave and the stretch. And what I could do is go about halfway in between here. And now that bend is about in the middle. I'll go ahead and zero that out. And then I'll do my squash and hit S again. And so now what I get is this. Right. Now, I do just want to sort of show you a way of like animating smarter instead of harder. So I like this squash, and I realize I'm going from here down to the squash to here, and now I want to go back to the squash and then back to here. And I could just go out here and make those keys, or I could just copy those keys from what I already have. So I have this keyframe here. I could right click and do copy, and then go out to here, and that seems to be just eyeballing it right now. Let's say about there, and paste, paste. And so now I have that squash again. Right? And then I have this key here. So another way I can copy a keyframe is if I middle mouse click and drag on my timeline, you'll see that the timeline isn't updating, or the viewport isn't updating. So now all of the values, and my channel box isn't updating either, all of the values from frame 1 are still the same over here. And so if I hit S, now I have essentially copied that keyframe. So now I have that same keyframe there again. And what we get is this. Okay, and this is looking a little silly, but just bear with me. So I do want to show you one more thing we can do. I can hold Shift and middle click and highlight this entire range of keyframes stopping with this one, right click and copy, and then if I go to my very last keyframe, I can hit paste, paste, and I can just paste that entire sequence of animation. If I want to speed it up, speed up the process, I can highlight all of this, copy, paste. I'll just do that a few more times. Okay. So now we have this animation. And I just want to play around with this a little bit. This is fun, but probably a little too big. Probably got a little carried away, right? Looks like somebody's trapped in the barrel. So what I'm going to do, select my barrel control, and go to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, mount this over here again, and I'm only doing this so you can see it in the same viewport. And what's kind of neat here is you can see the pattern happening, right? And all of my animation right now is on my bend and my squash, right? So let's start with our bend. Right? And one of the things you may notice on this is that it doesn't actually work very smoothly. This first one does. It goes through here and into here. But you'll notice here we get this weird hiccup in it, right? And so what I'm going to do is choose all of my curves, highlight them all, and I want to make sure that we're interpolating this with the right tangents. And so I'm just going to choose auto tangents. And that's going to smooth this out a little bit, and you'll see that now that's you'll see the difference between the two from that to that. And so now we're getting a little bit of a smoother motion without as much of a hesitation in the middle, right? But the other thing I want to point out is that with this squash and stretch, I can exaggerate it more or less, and the same with the bend. So I can hold Alt and right click and zoom in and out. We already know this. But then again, if I hold Shift, Alt, and right click, I can zoom in and out this way, just up and down, right? And so this will allow me to see the entire curve a little bit better. And what I want you to recognize is that all of this is just data, right? I can very easily highlight all of this and move it with my middle click, or even more importantly for this, I can scale it. If I hit R, I can scale this curve by middle click dragging to the middle. I'm making my squash and stretch a little bit less exaggerated, right? And so now you'll see that that's not exaggerated enough. Let's do down to something like that. Still a little too under exaggerated. So let's do one more time on my squash. I like about that for my squash. There we go. Now the same with my bend. If my bend is too big or not big enough, I could always grab this and scale it down. There we go. So that's looking a little bit more like what I was thinking. Now, here's the thing I want you to recognize. On my timeline, all of my, so frame 75, all of my squash keys, all of my bend keys, all of them are happening at the same time. And so one of the things I could do to make this a little bit more appealing is maybe have some of them happen on different frames. So let's try the bend. Let's have the bend happen just a little later. So instead of starting on frame 1, what if I had it start on frame 2? And hit W for move, as I still had it on the scale. And I'm just going to drag all of my keys one frame later. And you'll see now that my bend happens on a different frame than my squash. And let's see what that looks like. So that's looking a little bit more springy now, right? Let's try one more frame. What if I made all of those happen one more frame later? So now, you'll notice here, everything else happens on frame 1, but my bend doesn't happen until frame 3. And so if we watch that now, we'll see that the motion of this barrel is a little bit more squishy and springy, right? And so what's happening there is what we call overlapping action, right? That's what we learn about in the 12 principles. We're seeing overlapping action as the principle happening because now not all of these things are happening on the same frame. Now it's also worth pointing out that we could do some stuff with the tangents if we would like. So I'm going to very quickly zoom out here. And this is going to be a little bit of a quick explanation of this. But I'm going to grab all of these top keyframes. Actually, I'm going to grab all of these keyframes. And I'm going to make sure that the tangents are set to weighted tangents. So currently, if you see this little triangle at the end, they're non-weighted tangents. But if I go to tangent and, I go to keys, curves, weighted tangents. Now there's little boxes at the end of all of them. And what that's going to let me do is this. I can stretch it out. So the other way we could do that is we could grab all of these first tangents, all of these curves, and I could do something like this. So I could go through here, just grab all of these first keyframes. And of course I could do it one at a time if I wanted to, but I'm just doing this in bulk. And then hold shift, grab all of these tangents, hold shift, and add those again here. And then I can edit these all together. And I can kind of pull this out and get this to start to look a little bit more like a bell curve. I'm just going to do this on the other side too. And again, I'm just doing this in bulk where you may want to do it in one at a time. Right. So now deselected some stuff here. And so by doing this, now it's going to hold that end spot a little bit more and get just a little bit more springiness on it. So I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. It's looking kind of fun, and now everything kind of has some motion to it, and I'm really enjoying this. So we'll pick this up in the next video.